Because like Lewis said, if it's not true, it's not important. But if it is true, it's critically important. It just cannot be moderately important. It has to be one or the other, unimportant, or it should be something you give your life to.
Welcome back to the Fighting Something Real podcast. This is your host, Janelle Wood, and you are listening in for season 7, where we talk with different young women from various backgrounds about their faith journeys and allow them space to ask tough questions about God and Christianity. And we're recording again with my niece, Noelle. For those of you who missed it, here's a short clip from my first conversation with Noelle that shares a bit of where she's at currently in her worldview. If what Jesus said was true, would you want to know when he said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me? He also said, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And that's both of those are in the book of John in the Bible. You said maybe. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that maybe.
Interesting. I think I just kind of wasn't sure about the question. But the way you phrased it earlier,
Okay. That was
like,
a better way.
kind of helped me. Yeah, I think so. But yeah, like, if this dude was real, I'd meet him. I'd say hey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's go, girl. Let's go, girl. He is real. Let's find out together. Noelle, we're back today with Detective J. Warner Wallace. What did you think of that first conversation? I know he's listening, but let's talk about him before we officially introduce him.
It was good. It was a little bit rushed, I remember, but it was very rich, and I'm excited to continue today.
Yeah, awesome. And yesterday we had a recording as well. You said something in that recording with somebody else that kind of segues into today's conversation. You said that just because somebody else finds Jesus compelling doesn't convince you that he's compelling. And we also talked some about anxiety that you have that I think you might even say you somewhat attribute to your previous Christian beliefs. Um, yeah. And so do you mind sharing any of that before we dive into this conversation today?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I definitely have anxiety. And it's something I live with. I don't think Christianity like started it or like made me have it. I definitely was anxious as a child about religion. But not, yeah, I guess it's not a cause. But yeah, and yeah, I strongly agree with um just because you believe it, why do I have to? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I understand where you're coming from, Noel, and I agree with you. This is why I tell jurors all the time, I never say I'm going to prove something to you, because proof is something that is really in the eye of the person who's trying to prove something. In other words, I can share with you evidence for a claim, and I can argue that it's the best inference from evidence. But whether I've demonstrated that or not, that's up to each juror. The jurors are not monolithic. There's 12 people, and you often get 12 kind of very nuanced perceptions about what the evidence might demonstrate. So I think we have to have a certain amount of modesty. And I think I would like to have that even with you. Like, I'm not, yes, I look at the evidence for Christianity and I find it persuasive, but that doesn't mean you will. But it also doesn't necessarily mean that sometimes the problem for me is that, look, no matter what I say, the person I'm talking to may not find it persuasive. Okay. That's I can't control that. I can't get inside your mind and say, okay, we're going to tweak this little thing here and between them all, it'll all work out. Can't do that. So, but I also know that sometimes the problem is that I haven't communicated it well enough, or I haven't. This is true in jury trials for sure. This is why sometimes I have a district attorney I work with who is just so annoyingly thorough. And there have been many times where I said, John, stop. I mean, you're killing this. Jury is glazed over. I'm watching every expression of the jury, and they are over it. They're done. Stop. I mean, you've already made your case. They've already believed you. You're just killing them now. And he's like, no, because the biggest regret he would have would be if he got there and one juror was not convinced because he didn't go all the way. He didn't do everything he could do to communicate the case as thoroughly as he thought he could communicate it. So I've kind of learned that sometimes the problem is just that I haven't communicated it well. And sometimes the issue is just that no matter what I would have said, the person I'm talking to would not have been persuaded. That's okay. I think there's lots of reasons why we believe a truth claim, and there's lots of reasons why we might reject one. If I'm honest with you, what I've seen with witnesses and suspects and jurors is that sometimes the thing that keeps us from assessing the claim fairly is stuff we bring to the table before we start assessing the claim. This is also true, for example, in marriage, right? Like whatever your adult life is going to look like, it's probably going to be influenced a lot by how you were raised. And so what you'll do in your relationships will either be a reaction to how you were raised or an effort on your part to mimic how you were raised. But how you were raised caused one or the other. And this is also true when we assess any truth claims. So when jurors come in, they aren't just coming in as blank slates. They're coming in with histories and preferences and lifestyles and things that they bring to the table. And I don't know what those things are. So that's why I'm not overly ambitious. In other words, I can share with you what I think is true, and that might persuade you, it might not. But I don't think that really bears on whether or not it's true, because I've had people who weren't persuaded, and the guy would confess a year later, oh, guess they were wrong. Okay, so the evidence, whether it's true or not, is different than whether or not you or I are persuaded about it. It might be true when we're not persuaded, but it still doesn't make it untrue. So I think it was just, a lot of it is just trying to figure out like what are the questions. For me, it's not so much an issue like what are the claims of Christianity. My questions are always, well, what are your issues? What are the things that you have questions about? Because you're not going to make a step toward any claim until you first knock down whatever the questions you have. And I'm not sure that all of us can answer every question. Like we said last time, a lot of times we have to make a step with the unanswered questions, but we could try, you know.
Yeah.
Well, Noelle.
So let's talk about some of those
Yeah.
questions. What are the things that
Yeah.
are giving you the most pause?
That's something that I think about a lot. Like, is Christianity a good idea? Is it the right choice? Especially because of these kind of other religions that exist and are very important to other uh, believers. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why is Christianity the right choice? And you've told me like the evidence and like the Bible and that's great and cool. It just doesn't. I guess it's not enough for me. And I do think a lot of kind of my opinions about it are because of my life experiences. As I assume is the same for you guys. Based on what you've been through, you've decided um, what you want to believe in, and um, right now, I'm just not sure. So yeah, kind of all over the place there, but
No, I think those are good. Those are
yeah,
good points, and I think so. So I'll just tell you
awesome.
a little bit about my approach to this. You're right. Sometimes our life experiences can be the reason why we believe something is either true or untrue, or it can be the thing that moves us toward examining something to see if it's true or untrue. That was not my case, though. Um, I didn't have like I'm not a Christian because it's working for me, or I was trying to solve a problem. I wasn't a drug addict, or I didn't have like a crashed marriage. It didn't have. There was nothing that could cause me to want to change my life. In other words, sometimes people have issues in their background, and those are the things that propelled them to look at something, and they needed it. So it ended up being something that worked for them. That I always say this Christianity does not work for me. I just my journey, it doesn't. I mean, for the most part, I was raised in the arts. A lot of the things that I believed foundationally had to be re-examined.
Mm.
That's why I say it doesn't come down because I'm in because of the evidence. That's it. Do I always like it? No. My nature is so otherly in terms of compared to God that I'm I'm not a godly person by nature. I don't think any of us are. And scripture really kind of teaches that. that really no one, and you know that intuitively. We know this from studies. I just did a chapter in a book on this, that there's kind of this fallacy out there, I think, that people are by their very nature good, and they're corrupted by systems in which they're placed.
Mm.
But the data is very clear. And if you've ever raised kids, you know you don't need to teach your kids to be impatient or selfish. That's an innate response.
Yeah,
A little bit.
yeah.
And so what happens instead is that people are fallen and they corrupt even good systems.
Mm.
It's just the opposite of what I think the world's trying to tell us. And so because I know that we have a problem and that we, given our own choices, we're going to favor me. You even see this, for example, that there's a certain level of altruism that people will express. People can be very giving. And the studies show this until resources get tight.
Mm.
They are giving until you saw this in the pandemic. You couldn't find toilet paper. Why? Because we become hoarders when resources shrink, because our base nature is self-preservation at the expense of anybody else.
Mm.
And that nature just expresses, again, what we are. So there are some things. And by the way, that claim that we are innately fallen and have to kind of find a structure by which to deny ourselves to be the kind of people we know we ought to be, well, that's not native to every theistic worldview. That's native to Christianity. There's a lot about the world and about who we are that, honestly, you're not going to find a home for it in any other theistic view. That's what that's what I don't know, forget about the books. I don't want to plug a book, but I'll tell you that in all the years I was working cases, I started to see attributes of human behavior that I thought, wow, this is over and over and over. So I started collecting them. And what I started to see was that these attributes, and most of them I started to collect before I became a Christian, because I was working gangs before I was a Christian. I was working SWAT before I was a Christian. I was working undercover before I was a Christian. I was working patrol before I was a Christian. And I would see these things and I would go, this is really interesting. I can almost predict what this knucklehead's going to say, because they all say this. We all do this thing. And as I became a Christian, I realized these are all ancient truths. And they're on Christian scripture. They're in the New Testament. That these attributes of human nature, they're there. And all the more modern studies that show that these are true just affirm these ancient principles. That was one of those layers of, I think, compelling evidence that helped me to see that even if I did. Now, look, I will tell you though, as an artist in the West LA, these did not. So in the end, like we said last time, it's not going to come down to whether or not I like it or don't like it. It's going to come down to, is Jesus who he said he was? Now, when I say that, I mean objectively, is not who I want him to be. I mean, was there truly a guy before I ever lived, before I had an opinion about it? Is there truly a guy who did rise from the grave, that did exactly what the New Testament said he did? If that's the case, well, then I'm probably going to have to adjust my views, because he would be something other than another human with another opinion. Because no other theistic leader, no other system of theism or anything of spirituality has as its leader a resurrected man. That's a unique claim. Buddha did not rise from the grave. Muhammad's still dead. But Jesus, that's a different kind of claim. If that's true, it's a different category. Now that, of course, comes to the question: is it true? Now, why would we believe it's true? I get that,
Right.
but for me, it was not about, well, I'd like it to be true. It
Uh,
was, that claim is the upstream claim, like we talked about last week.
Did you have a question there, Noelle? It looked like maybe you did.
not right now. Yeah,
So I
I'll
guess
hold off.
if you believe that Jesus is who he says he is, does that exclude every other religion then by default? Because Christianity is a truth claim, and it's
Well, that's a good point. I
exclusive by
want to address
nature.
that issue, Janelle. Noelle, if you don't mind me stepping on you for a second here. You said something earlier,
That's
and I meant to
great.
get to it, and now that you mentioned that, Janelle, it jogged my memory. There is something that I think about the exclusivity of the claim that I think is repulsive for a lot of people, and for me, it was for me too. But if you think about it, every claim, so just on a human level, Are you close to your parents? No, I don't know enough about you to know this answer.
Yeah.
Okay, you're close to your dad?
Yes.
Does he have a
Sure.
favorite?
Yeah.
Does he have like certain things he likes? Like if you were going to go over to his
Yes.
house for dinner for his birthday, would you know what to buy him?
I'd make him a German chocolate cake.
Okay, perfect. So if you could, if you meant, so if the goal was to please your father for his birthday, you know what to do. But what if instead you'd imagine a different version of your dad, and every time you saw him for his birthday, you gave him the stuff he hates? And he's like, oh my gosh, I've told her 1,000 times I love German chocolate cake, but she refuses to even embrace the fact that I'm not even sure she can. Someone love me if on my birthday she continues to bring me the stuff that I don't like? But when I've told her, I've revealed to her exactly who I am and what I like. I think on a very human level, you'd know that you're probably not going to be invited back to your father's house too often if every time you go, you pretend like he's somebody else. So the question
I
really
bring him
becomes,
cantaloupe.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
he
yes.
hates
Well,
cantaloupe.
Yeah.
That's my
I would
brother.
actually
He hates
love that. I
cantaloupe.
would love cantaloupe. Yeah, I could live with
Funny
that.
story.
Yes.
But I don't know why he doesn't like cantaloupe. Maybe you should just ignore him
I
altogether.
I know because
Because
we were little and he puked it up. Anyway.
that was okay. Is
You
that
tell that
why?
story.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's too funny. Okay, so my point though is, aside from the puking cantaloupe, I
Right.
don't need that today.
Right.
But do you see what I'm saying? If look, these views are so different about the nature of the next life, about the nature of God, the nature of the spiritual realm, that they could all be false, but they cannot all be true because they make competing, contradictory claims. So we're either stuck with they're all false or one of them is true. And then that's the case that maybe Christianity isn't that one, maybe it's something else. And let's dive into it. Whoever does that, I think you should do it evidentially. Figure out which of those views, if any, are true, and then commit yourself to it. Because like Lewis said, if it's not important, if it's not true, it's not important. But if it is true, it's critically important. It just cannot be moderately important. It has to be one or the other, unimportant, or it should be something you give your life to. So I think in the end, I want to know, like, what is the nature of the father I'm about to go visit with a birthday gift in my hands? I want to know because I think if you do that enough times, you'll convince you. If you just ignore what he likes and call him by a different name and go in there and act like he's somebody he's not, had kind of a completely different work history, completely different family history, just pretend like he's some other person. At some point, your dad's going to stop inviting you. And that's kind of what happens here, right? If there's a lot of Jim Wallaces in my community. I looked it up. I couldn't believe it. Small town, but there's a lot of Jim Wallaces. So if I gave you directions to my house, or if I just told you to go see Jim Wallace, but I gave you somebody else's directions, you won't end up at my house. So there's a truth about where I live and who I really am. And if you don't nail it, we won't be eating dinner together. And that's really true for every other description. The set of directions that gets you to everybody else's house is not the if it's a wrong house, it's not going to do you any good. That now, is that exclusive? Am I being cruel by saying no? I'm James Warner Wallace and I live at this address, and but you continue to say no. I think you live at that address. Am I being cruel? No, it's just the reality of how truth claims work and how relationships work. That if somebody has a relationship with you and loves you, but really thinks of you as an entirely different person, somebody you're not, at some point you're going to question whether they really love you. And that's why I think getting you right, your identity, Noelle, is incredibly important to anyone who says that they love you. That's just true for us too with God. If we really love God, if there is a God, then this identity is going to be important. Now, I may have the wrong identity. Fine. But it's not like I can't make up an identity any more than you would say, yeah, it's okay. Just imagine me to be anybody you want me to be and I'll still love you. At some point, you're like, no, I'm not even that person. I don't know what you're creating, but it's not me. Stop saying you love me because you love something you've created in your mind. It's not me. You would say that. Well, this is true for anyone who's in a love relationship. Identity matters in love relationships. And that's true for God too. So it's a matter of figuring out, well, who is he? And I don't think it's meant to be like I'm going to exclude everybody else. No, I'm going to make sure that I give you enough information so that you can make a decision. And if you decide against me, that's okay. But it won't be for lack of information. It won't be for lack of effort. You may just decide, I want nothing to do with you. And I will grant your wish because God's a gentleman. He's not going to force you into his presence. He is going to allow you to make a choice based on who you think he is. So I knew that. And as I was kind of going through the Gospels and reading through them, I thought, okay, it's time for me to make a decision. And, I think that part of the problem, well, I think I was lucky because unlike you, Noel, I had nobody talking about Jesus before I first examined him on the pages of the New Testament. I could make a decision about his nature without any input from anyone else. That's just how I encountered it. But you had a bunch of people talking to you about Jesus that may have changed the way you see it or even see the evidence or even want to be associated. Look, I get it. I'll just be, should I say this publicly? Probably not, but
Yes.
I'll say it anyway.
Yes.
When you speak at a lot of Christian conferences, you are sometimes struck by just how many people are unthoughtful about what I think to be one of the most critical things you'll ever believe. And if you said, well, I'm going to stay in this belief system on the basis of people I'm meeting, you probably wouldn't stay. I'm just going to be, but I think that's really true for any worldview because I don't think people are thoughtful. I think most of us are reactive, not responsive. We don't respond thoughtfully. We just react emotionally. I think that's who we are anyway. So I think it wouldn't matter if it was Christianity or if it was atheism or any other worldview, philosophically or religiously. I think we just are not innately thoughtful. It's another example of how we are not innately good and corrupted by systems, but we are innately fallen and we corrupt systems, including theistic systems, religious systems. We corrupt everything.
Mm.
But there's just times when I'm like, yeah, I'm just glad I didn't meet anybody until I was already in.
Mm.
And then I could make a decision. And every time I do it, I'll tell you something, a little trick too, that I've learned with Susie, my wife, is that once I knew there was a God, I realized that people and how they behaved was not nearly as important to me. So, for example, our marriage changed dramatically when I realized that every conversation between Susie and I was really not really between Susie and I. It was between me and God. I knew how I was supposed to behave. I was going to say a certain thing that I didn't want to have regrets before God, not before Susie. Now, if Susie responded in a way that was unkind, that's between her and God. My response is between me and God. I'm going to give her 100%. I'm going to expect zero in return. That 100 to 0 relationship, it changes everything because that just allows you to forgive everything around you because that's my conversation with you, Noelle, is not between you and I. I'm having a conversation with another child of God. And how I respond to you is between me and God. How you respond to me is between you and God. Even if you don't believe there is a God, it's still between you and God. So it takes the pressure off of me. Well, that same is true for believing that Christianity is true. You have to eliminate every person you know who's ticked you off because there are going to be a lot of those. And you have to look at the claim itself that your belief is between you and God, not between you and any believer or any church or any pastor or any system. It's between you and God. And that to me took the pressure off because I didn't have to. But like I said, I was luckier than you because I wasn't raised in a place where where I had to make a decision about, is this true or is this what this guy thinks? Or is there a different version of this that maybe I should be examining because this guy's kind of sideways? I didn't have to do that.
Yeah. You said a lot, and I really like that. And I like your talk about bringing my dad cantaloupe when I know he hates it. And you said like in relation to the metaphor, but like it's been made clear to me that my dad doesn't like cantaloupe and that I keep bringing it to him. I don't know that it has been made explicitly clear to me what God wants from me if he exists. Because of all of these different kind of sources. And I have not looked into the Bible a whole lot. But I've been kind of turned away because of that. And yeah, I guess I just like I'm not really sure if I actually do know what God would want from me. Um, and if I were to look for that, I would find a lot of like different translations of the Bible, um, some of which say vastly different things, at least in my experience with hearing about it. And that reads as hypocrisy to me. Um,
Mhm.
and that kind of, and again, it's humans' fault, but humans ruined it. So,
Well, let me address a couple of those things. Those are good. Those are really good.
mhm.
Way to go, Noelle.
Yeah, those are
Giving
those are
them some
really
work to
Thank
do.
you.
no. Those are really. I mean, those are good. Those are things that I wondered too. And you hear a lot of
Yeah.
debate between Christians. Now, so here's what I will tell you. I had to know. I mean, if you're going to go to seminary, you have an opportunity to take Greek and Hebrew. What I love about how the translations are, so I'm just going to give you paint a story, paint a picture a little bit, so you can see why I'm a little less hung up on that now than I used to be. So translations are really designed to, and there's a ton out there. Here are the extremes. One, are they word for word taking the original language of the oldest manuscripts we have and just turning that original language into English? So those are word for word translations. And then there are some that are idea for idea translations. And here's why they even try to do that. If I said to you in English in 2024, last night the Warriors killed the Lakers. Well, if I was going to translate that 1,000 years from now, the Warriors killed the Lakers. Oh my gosh, what am I even talking about? There's nothing in there that says it's about basketball. And this word kill, I'm not using it
Right.
to mean they actually murdered them. I mean, it was just a blowout. Okay, so I would have to have, if I could, and I could translate it just straight up, word for word. And then you can just figure it out on your own. Good luck. Or I could just kind of translate it idea for idea. So the spectrum of translations really covers this. So here's what I do. On my bookshelf, I've got them all. And I use Logos. So Logos is it's a lot of work, but Logos is a computer program that kind of puts them side by side. Now, I wouldn't suggest that for you, but I would say, look, let's look at where you want to be in terms of translations, like a good word for word, and it reads more difficultly because it is word for word. And sometimes it feels like I wouldn't have said it that way, but in the original Greek, it's actually said exactly like, so they're trying to get it as close to word for word as they can, even though it kind of seems clumsy sometimes or not as easy to memorize or like it doesn't feel like it's in 2024 English. So ESV, NASB, these are on that end of that word for word kind of translation. Well, then you move over to like the idea for idea. It's the NLT, for example, maybe New Living Translation. It's really a concept for concept. So it probably in that translation, it would say that the Warriors defeated the Lakers by 20 points. It would just give you the concept would be idea for idea. Sometimes when I'm with Susie, I use my phone. I'll read it in the ESV. We're in Acts right now. We're in Acts chapter 15. So we will read it in the ESV, and then I'll read it to her in the NLT. So she's now both. But by the way, both of these translation groups, these committees, are not trying to deceive you. They're trying to get it so that you don't miss it. This is exact. If you were in the first century and you said it this way, this is what you would hear. This is what it would mean if they're doing idea for idea or word for word. And I think if you look at both of those, I usually just do the ESV and the NLT. I'll read it in the ESV first, the NLT second, call it a day. And that gets a good combination of the word for word translation, but it's really not because someone's trying to deceive me. They're written for different purposes. Like for example, if I had teenagers, I would probably spend more time in the NLT. Although in my youth group, we always use the ESV. But I'm just saying, if I wanted it to feel like it was a little more accessible, I'd probably use the NLT. But again, what's great about them is they're going back to the best and most ancient manuscript evidence we have. And this changes every year because we find additional documents. So if you've got a translation that's several hundred years old, it won't be using as many ancient manuscripts as we have today. And sometimes those manuscripts, it's not just the ancient biblical manuscripts. Sometimes you find an ancient Greek manuscript from the first century that has nothing to do with the Bible, but they're using a biblical word. And it gives us better insight. Oh, that's what that word meant in the first century to this group. Now we can kind of go, okay, maybe so we're doing our best to kind of give it to you the way that it's really written. But here's what I would say about the story of Jesus that I think is so fascinating. If you had all these, but I would also say this to you, Noelle, don't listen to me, and don't listen to Janelle, and don't listen to people who are secondary, tertiary, a billion sources removed. You have a text you could read if you wanted to know what Baha'u'llah, the prophet of the Baha'i faith, said about life. It's available to you. You don't need to talk to somebody who's a Baha'i. You could read the scriptures, Baha'u'llah, his writings. The same is true here. So what I'd like you to do is to say, hey, you know what? I'm at least going to read the New Testament before I kick it to the curb, because I just think that then you can make a decision based on what you're reading. I mean, do we really know who Jesus was or what he was like? I think I had to read the Gospels 4 or 5 times before I really got a good handle on the robust, because every author paints him like your mom would say one thing about you, your aunt would say another. They all give pieces of the overall puzzle of who Noelle is. The same is true with the gospel authors, and so you have to kind of read them as a group and go, okay, because some are coming at it from a completely different perspective than others. Luke is he didn't know Jesus personally. He had to rely on eyewitnesses. His account is different than somebody like John, who calls him the one that Jesus loved. I mean, he really knew Jesus well. His view is slightly different than Luke's, and it's worth reading both. But I would say that you need to kind of read all of those before, and don't trust people who are teachers, because you don't need my spin on it. You just need to. I honestly think, and I'll say this, and maybe I'm being presumptuous, but I honestly think that if you will simply focus on who Jesus is in the four Gospels and read them, that you're going to fall in love with at least what he stands for, if not Jesus himself. And at some point, your view of who he is, you're going to surprise yourself, because you've heard a lot of things about Jesus that probably aren't even true. And as you read about him in the Gospels, you're going to just go, wow, either I didn't know that, or I didn't see that coming, or this surprises me. But you're going to learn something that I think will ultimately change the way you view Christianity as a whole. And I think that you're going to want to surround you. Here's one thing I've learned from the Gospels: it's humility. This is a worldview, the only theistic worldview that says you cannot know God or be in his presence by doing something. Do the 10 Commandments, do karma yoga, do the Eightfold Path, do. They're all do's. Do. And only Christianity says, no, you can't do it. And here's why. Anytime you think you can earn something, you will become proud of the fact that you earned it. It's a pride issue. This is the view that says, no, pride is not elevated. Humility is elevated. And you know that you love people who aren't full of themselves. You love humble people. Well, there's a view out there that'll make you more humble. And if you have not met Christians who kind of possess that humility, then you're probably not meeting Christians who have spent a lot of time reading the words of Jesus. So you read the words of Jesus. You become the expert. Don't let anybody else tell you they're an expert, including me. I just want, all I'm trying to do with you is to I guess, maybe motivate you to do that reading, to see who he is. And you can also see who everybody else is too. Before I was a Christian, when I was in high school, I had a sociology teacher who was a Baha'i, and so he gave me the writings of Baha'u'llah. I loved it, because I thought it was like fortune cookie wisdom. I found two or three things in there that I could use. I didn't think it was true, but I found some wisdom. I thought it was kind of cool, ancient, but I'm not a Baha'i, because to me it was all a bunch of everything was a bunch of nonsense. It's all untrue, equally untrue. So why would I worry about it? But I at the end, I want you to start to read it and see it for yourself. Be a good detective.
I like what you said about not trusting people that tell you things about Christianity. And that's kind of where I am right now. I'm not really going to just change my worldview based on anything that you guys tell me. And that's just how I've been brought up. And you just can't believe everything that people tell you. It's not a good way to live life. Um, and again, with the human part of it is like just, yeah, we come in with our own biases and our own
Mhm.
life experiences. Um, and as much as we try to be unbiased and fair and, you know, idea for idea or word for word, it still gets it still gets impacted by human flaws. And I guess that doesn't necessarily make me not want to read the Bible at all, but it's kind of what has stopped me in the past.
Well, okay,
Um,
so look at it this way. There's almost nothing that isn't in, well, everything that's written, everything that is part of the human wisdom collection has been impacted by the bias of people inside that
for
system,
sure.
whatever it may be. So,
Right.
and all of
History
us,
books,
right, all of us believe
anything.
somebody. All of us believe somebody, right? We all believe somebody. You do too. You
Mm.
just said to me a minute ago, well, I was raised not to trust anybody. Well, why would you trust the people who raised you not to trust somebody? See, it turns out that we all
Yeah,
pick who it is we're going to trust. And I get that. And that's okay. I mean, I know when I was in university at UCLA, I really was impacted by the professors because it seemed to me those professors knew a lot more than my parents did because they did in that particular area. But I started, so I mean, I look in the end, that's why I would say, and cops are really good at this. I assume everyone's a liar, even you two. Sorry, you assume everyone's a liar because that works well for you. If you assume people are truth tellers, no one's ever going to go to jail. But instead, you assume everyone's a liar until proven otherwise, and somebody might go to jail. So in the end, I get that kind of skepticism. I really do, and I want you to be skeptical as that as well. But here's what I would say about. Let me offer a thought experiment about Scripture that helped me a little bit. So, if we had an ancient set of manuscripts, as many as we have in the for the New Testament, but they described a Jesus who was different. They describe a Jesus who is just a preaching rabbi in the first century, just a dude. Had some really powerful messages for sure, and taught all the stuff that he teaches on the Sermon on the Mount, all that. It's all good. But he didn't work a miracle, and he wasn't born of a virgin, and he didn't rise from the grave. He just died on a cross because he was getting too powerful. Okay, if that's what we had a record of, I guarantee you there wouldn't be a single scholar on planet Earth who would doubt the veracity and existence of Jesus of Nazareth, given how many documents and how close they are to the actual period they're talking about. If all they described was a naturalistic version of Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, not the Christ of Christianity, just Jesus of Nazareth, the dude who didn't do any more than anybody else. It basically sounds like John the Baptist, a preacher who got himself in trouble and was eventually killed. Nobody would doubt his existence. Nobody would doubt the accuracy of the New Testament. But you insert one miracle, and everyone's like, I'm not even sure I can trust these things. That tells me something. It tells me this has never been about the number of manuscripts we have, the historical accuracy of those manuscripts. This has been about a presuppositional bias against the miraculous. Because without the miracles, nobody would doubt this dude. So for me, I had to ask myself, do I have any good reasons to believe that something is operating outside of space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry? That's all I needed to know. Because this Jesus on the pages of Scripture is somehow operating outside of space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. He's doing things that he shouldn't be able to do because I didn't believe those things could be done. And so I had to look and say, well, look, it turns out I did believe that we're in a universe that has a beginning. There's a cause for a finite universe that's outside of space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. It has to be because space, time, and matter aren't even available until the universe begins. So whatever begins, it has to be outside of those things. It could be a natural cause. But natural for us typically means it resides within space, time, and matter. And whatever this is, it's by definition unnatural, extra natural, supranatural. I don't know what the heck it is, but it's outside of space, time, and matter. We're also in a universe that seems finely tuned. That's not even a controversial statement. Atheists believe the universe is finely tuned, but they deny a fine tuner. or in a universe that has the beginning of life from non-life. Nobody knows how that occurs. Again, this is a number of things that atheists, me as an atheist, could not answer, yet I still held my position as an atheist. Anyway, long story short, I just needed to know, is there a cause outside of space, time, and matter? If there is, then there's no miracle on the pages of the New Testament that should stop you. Because if there's a God of the universe that can blink everything into existence from nothing, I'm guessing he could walk on water. That's a small potato miracle. If that other thing exists, that's why I'm telling you, in the end, it comes down to, who is this dude? And what is keeping me? A lot of, I'm going to tell you what I think kept me and what's keeping my dad out is that he does not want it to be true. I don't think that's your situation. But if you ever find yourself kind of inclining in that direction, stop yourself. There's lots of things I don't want to be true. If I get diagnosed with cancer tomorrow, I'm not going to want it to be true. But by not wanting it will not make it true, false. It's going to be true if it's true. So just make sure you're not in that position. Because what I've discovered is that people stay out for one of three reasons. One, there's no good evidence for it. It's intellectual. Two, they have an emotional. So it's either rational or emotional. They have some emotional reason they don't want it to be true. Or three, it's volitional. That's my dad. Does not want to bend his knee to it because it would put limits that he's already decided he doesn't want to embrace. And he's 80, 84, 85. So he's already made these decisions. He's not going to change it. I mean, I've had this conversation. I wrote a book to him called God's Crime Scene. He won't even read it. So this is just the way it is. But for you, I would just encourage you, don't let the reason you don't do it be because you don't want it to be true, because that's closing your mind to all kinds of amazing possibilities. This is also true for relationships and choices you make in your career. I mean, in the end, you want to be as rational as you can be about it, as objective as you can be, given that none of us are really entirely objective. I get that, but we can make an effort.
I have a follow-up question if you don't, Noelle, but I want to give you the opportunity first.
No, yeah, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a great segue to a question I wanted to ask you, Jim, because sometimes I'll talk with friends or I've been like this where, and Noelle actually asked about this. She's like, why do Christians feel so compelled to share their faith with others? But then there's a certain point, because her and I had a great little discussion about that. I try not to push back too much, but I hope I gave something for you to think about why Christians care about that.
It's super hard, isn't it, though, seriously, Noelle, to listen to family members? I think that's so hard. Like, this is my dad. I know a lot more about this topic than my dad, but my dad's not going to listen to me.
Mm.
I'm his son. And I don't know, even if I was his long separated son, I think when it's just different. It's harder, I think. And Jesus experienced this too. So
Yeah.
anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So sometimes as Christians, and this is a question more for someone listening who loves somebody in their life who, doesn't want to know about Jesus. At what point do you let go of, like, is that every time you talk with your dad, a conversation in between you and the Lord? You were talking about how it's always between you and God. Like, you're praying for opportunity to share this life-giving truth with him, or do you let go at some point? And how do you love somebody well in the midst of that? Talking just the other day with somebody who was like, oh, I gotta, make sure that they know truth. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think that causes a lot of tension between people who believe differently. And yeah, I'd love to hear your
So
thoughts.
I would say, like, for you guys being family members, it makes a difference. And I would say, Noelle, that if I saw you every holiday for 5 years and these kinds of conversations occurred, well, I would probably never initiate another one. Here's why. It's not like, I mean, once I feel like I have emptied out what I am capable of emptying out, I'm done. I've done it. And you now know why I believe this is true. And I'm saying if I did this every time we saw each other for 5 years, you would know why I believe it's true. And my dad knows everything he needs to know. It's not as though he has not heard the claims of the gospel, right? And they're offensive claims because the gospel is innately offensive because it's the one thing that is centered on humility.
Mm.
Just look at it that way. It turns out, believe it or not, the thing that you value the most in all of your friends, if you really think about it, is some form of humility. Like, oh, she's easy to get along with. Oh, she's teachable. These are all shades of humility. We love people who possess humility. They're easy to love. People who are prideful, you can't teach them. You can't tell them anything. They're so judgmental. They hoard their money. It's all about them because they're just the opposite of humble. They're prideful. They're self-focused. They're not selfless. They're selfish. And so it turns out that this view I hold is the one view that will rid you of selfishness because you can't enter. Every other view says, hey, you can earn your way in here. Really? That's going to make you selfless? I don't think so. That's going to make you prideful. You're going to look around and go, well, what's this dude doing here? He's not working as hard as me. Those systems are innately just build pride and selfishness. This system is all about shedding all of that. So I tell my dad everything I can tell him. He knows what's true. But until he's ready to bend his knee, this is what Paul writes to the Philippians. He says, have this attitude in yourselves, which is also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped. But he emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant and being made in the image of men. And being found in appearance as a man, which he wasn't, he humbled himself to the point of death, even death on a cross. And for this reason also, God highly exalted him because of his humility. He was highly, this is the backward claim of Scripture, that exaltation comes at bending of your knee. And he bestowed upon him the name which is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow, of all those in heaven and earth and under the earth, and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. If he is who he said he was, then unfortunately, we're all going to figure this out at some point. We're all going to know it at some point. And we're either going to be right or wrong about our views prior. This is true, by the way, of any kind of post-life. I mean, if Buddhism is true, we're going to know that it was true once we die. Whatever the claim is, we'll know it's true once we die. And I think for my dad, he knows now everything that I know that I could tell him. And now it's a question of whether he'll bend his knee. But it turns out, I would suggest that this is the one thing that most of us revere, are people who are willing to bend their knee. Not forget about religion for a second. Forget about Jesus. You just know that when you meet someone and they will bend their knee for what's in your best interest instead of theirs, for example, well, that's attractive. When they are always not trying, they listen to your opinion because they value you. They are selfless. They think of you higher than they think of themselves. You go, oh, that's attractive. Well, that's the stuff that comes out of a Christian worldview, even though you may not have seen it in adherence. People who have talked to you about this may not have exhibited that. But that's just the nature of messed up people. But it turns out that is the view you could hold. And it took me a lot of years to realize that. So I just let go of it. I also don't have to think so much of myself, Janelle, that I think, oh, I could just say it. I just need to say it a better way. Like I've already said it 1,000 different ways to my dad. I don't need to say it a better way. Until he gets to a place where he is willing to bend his knee. And that's why sometimes God operates in that space in which you're at the end of your rope. Not because he's trying to mess with you, but because it turns out that we often will not accept a view of the world that requires humility until something in life forces us to be humble. And then suddenly we're looking and going, oh, there it is all along. I just was not willing to see it. So I think God sometimes leads you to that place. Until he leads my dad there, it's not going to happen.
So do you pray for your dad every day?
Well, this is all you can do. You can do two things for people who are adamant in their position. One, you can pray because you believe that there's a God who answers prayer. Two, you can not be a jerk. You got to model Christ for these people, right? Because it turns out I can continue to be an obstacle for my dad if I'm not careful. Like you said, Noelle, you hit it perfectly. You're absolutely spot on. That there are people that you've experienced that can actually make it harder for you to believe something is true. So let's say, for example, that in your career let's say you're an artist and you really need to learn how to paint. It's just a skill. Or how about this? You need how to use Photoshop, not just that cheap Elements version. You need to learn the real version of Photoshop in order to do this well. But it turns out the teacher you have teaching Photoshop in your school is just a jerk. And you're like, you know what? I'd rather like do it by hand than learn under that guy. Well, it turns out you need to learn Photoshop. So you need to look past the fact that he's a jerk, because there's something valuable in Photoshop that you could actually get if you just focus on the program, like learn the program, ignore this knucklehead. But kind of the same thing is happening here. Let's focus on the text. Let's focus on Jesus and forget about whoever it is who's teaching Jesus. And then you'll at least find out what's true without all the stuff that, and I also, let me say one more thing about this. Some of us are wired to be so entirely skeptical, but just keep in mind, skepticism is one of the highest forms of pride, because it's us saying that I'm the only one I would trust. And so if we want to have humility, that's why prideful people are so hard to teach. And if you look at the studies on humility, if you adopt humility, your grades are better. Studies show that you'll do better on exams. And studies even show that people who are humble, this is so interesting to me, are better at discerning truth from lies. Isn't that interesting? Why? Because they come in and they're teachable. They're humble. That data that says that humble people are better at discerning truth from lies. When I read that study, I was like, it's true. I just never thought of it. But it's what keeps most of us away from Christianity. It's our pride. So how do you fight pride? Well, I can tell you this: it's not something you can pursue. You can't pursue humility. Our old friend Mike Adams, who I served with for years, and he committed suicide, and he was plagued by the way he was being treated online, and he had some hardship in his life, and ultimately couldn't handle it anymore. He was teased all the time, though, that he had a book he had written. It was called How to Become Humble in 10 Easy Steps, and How I Made It in 8. So the whole point was, if you pursue humility, you will ultimately become prideful about your pursuit. So here's how you get humility. And I think it's easier for an old man like me. Humility is an assessment, a proper assessment of who you are. It's a realization. And at some point I realized, yeah, I am not that special. And once you get to that place where you're over yourself, you're at least the doorstep of entering into a state of humility. So I think Spurgeon said it's the proper assessment of who we are. And if there's a God who is absolutely powerful enough to be perfect, well, there's a huge gap between us and him. And that proper assessment of who we are is what Christianity is all about. Because it's the only worldview that says, yeah, you can't do this. You can't earn this. We're going to have to do it for you because you're a mess. And if you try to do this on your own, you're just going to make a mess of the whole system. So I'm going to do this for you. And this is what Jesus claims to do. So I think that part of it helped me to bend my knee to it. That if there is, that's what I'm waiting for my dad to do. If my dad at some point gets to a place where he is not in complete control and has been successfully in complete control, and that's why a lot of times people get to a place where they're injured or they need help. They're at the end, and it's not because, oh, now I need this crutch. It's because finally they shed their pride, their control, which is just not a shade of pride. And now they're willing to consider other options. They take a position of humility, and then all of a sudden, all kinds of options become open to them, not because they're looking for crutches, because that's just more control. By the way, if you have a crutch, I'll just do this. That's just a control issue, another form of control. So that's why sometimes it happens that way, where people get to the end of themselves before they look at this seriously. I just don't want you to waste that much time. At some point, it's not, forget about Christianity. At some point, you make realizations in your life because you get to the end of yourself. Don't wait that long. Look at it now. It's okay to be less than perfect. It's okay to say, maybe I'm not the only source of truth. Maybe it's not about everything. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I prejudicially said, I did a lot of that for a lot of years, and I still do that. I don't think on this side of the cross, I mean, I'm not like great. I think the only difference is now, before I would celebrate what a jerk I was. And I wouldn't say it that way. I'd say it more profanely. This side, I realize I'm a jerk, and I'm still the same jerk sometimes, and I just struggle with it. I know I shouldn't be. It's my spirit wrestling with God's spirit because I'm on this side of the cross. Before I celebrated, yeah, screw you. I mean, it's if it's me or you, I just say it's mind over matter. I don't mind, you don't matter. That's how I used to say it all the time. But on this side, I'm like, no, I know that. I also will tell you that for a lot of years, as a homicide detective, I would draw a very, very tight circle around the people for whom I was willing to cry. That was my wife and my kids. I often say my dog Bailey was in that circle, but my cat Simba was not in that circle. I'm not crying over Simba. Sorry, I'm not a cat person, okay? But I can tell you that if I had a homicide tomorrow and it involved either one of you or it involved my nephews, I could work it because they're not in my circle. Just being honest, it's protecting me and allowing me to work these cases. Well, now on this side of the cross, I realize, no, God is saying, hey, you need to open that circle up. You can't be that way. You can't not care about people. I cared about you. You're a piece of trash, dude. you're in my circle. You need to open your circle. So I realize now that's the struggle. I still want to wrench the circle down, but I realize on this side of the cross, I need to open it up. And I think that's what motivates a lot of us to want to say, Noelle, I want you in that circle. And so I'm willing to take time right now to do what I have to do, if it'll help you to at least consider taking a step over that line.
Yeah.
Final thoughts, Noelle. Are you going to read the Bible? What do you think?
Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah, I
We'll
know.
see.
Listen, let's do
But
this. If you ever do, Noelle, please just reach out to me and say, yeah, I started. All right.
Okay.
But both of you, I have another interview I have to go to
Yeah.
right now.
Sorry.
So I'm going to say goodbye to both of you, but please
All
reach
right.
out to me in the future.
Thank
Yeah,
you
for
so
sure.
much for
Good
coming
to see you,
on.
Noelle.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Until
Janelle.
next time.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good to see you too. Thank you.